Dr. Andrea Gurney, a professor of psychology here at Westmont College. And in addition to being a professor here, I'm also a psychologist in town and a parent myself. So I want to just give a quick shout out and say thank you for entrusting your college student to us. One of the biggest joys and privileges about my work is that it doesn't feel like work at all because I so enjoy each one of my students, your son and daughter. During our time together today, we're going to be talking about searching for God knows what on identity and intimacy in college students. And I want to begin by reading a little excerpt from my book, Reimagining Your Love Story. It's the start of a chapter called Anchoring in Rough Seas, and it's all about emerging adulthood. As a sophomore in college, Sarah began counseling because of increasing levels of anxiety, particularly surrounding decision-making in life and relationships. Should she major in biology or chemistry? Spend a summer working in her hometown or abroad? Live off campus or on? Who would be her next roommate? Did her friend Dan want to pursue romance, or was she misreading the signals? Sarah was angst-ridden and overwhelmed by the choices she faced. As she learned strategies for managing her anxiety, I learned more about the environment in which she grew up. Sarah was raised in a wealthy suburb of Los Angeles and had everything a girl could want: loving parents, a sweet younger sister, and a solid group of friends. An above-average student, intent in her pursuit of the piano, and generally well-adjusted, life was relatively easy. I was never a party girl, but had plenty of friends. One of our favorite Friday night activities was to watch chick flicks like Mean Girls, The Notebook, and Crazy Stupid Love. We loved plotting our future lives, envisioning a super fun college experience, the perfect boyfriend, a successful career, and ultimately a beautiful home, kids and dog included. Sarah paused and swallowed hard. What a joke! I'm so far from any of that, and I hate the way it makes me feel. Through our work together, it became clear Sarah's expectations weren't being realized, and certainly not within the time frame she anticipated. Nearing the end of her senior year, she had no clear career path, no romantic prospects, and a growing sense of anxiety. By comparing herself to peers, she felt like a failure. 3 of my friends are in a serious relationship, one's engaged, my roommate's been accepted to grad school, and here I am still wondering if I've chosen the right major. And if one more person asks me what I'll be doing after graduation, I'm going to blow. Sarah was at an exciting crossroads, but like so many young adults, she grappled with the transitions into adulthood, accompanied by disappointment and unmet expectations. She is not alone. We all struggle with transition and change. However, brain development, delayed adulthood, a hypersexual culture with romantic expectations scripted by Hollywood, and obsessive reliance on social media makes this season of life especially taxing. Amen to that. You all as parents have a front row seat to your college students' season of life. That is especially taxing. Whether you want it or not, you do have that front row seat. In our time together today, I want to talk about how you can help your son or daughter not just survive, but thrive in college. And particularly, I want to narrow in on identity and intimacy. I like to think of it as how do we help them to live and love well during this season of transition and change. Specifically, in our time together, we're going to examine developmental tasks and brain changes, love in the 21st century, and what you can do to support your college student, besides just buckle up and enjoy the ride. So first, let's look at developmental tasks and what exactly is going on during this stage of life. And I'm going to use 2 theorists, Erik Erikson and Jeffrey Arnett, to just quickly explain to you what we know is happening. So Erik Erikson is a well-known developmental theorist, and he postulated that every single adolescent and young adult is going through two different stages. One he named identity versus role confusion. That's the fifth stage in his stage theory. And the second one is intimacy versus isolation. So in the identity stage, your college student is continuing the quest that they began in high school, that you probably know all too well, because that stage begins in early adolescence with the question of, who am I? And in college, it's more, who am I becoming? What major should I pursue? What do I want to do with my life? Where am I headed? Your son or daughter is seeking a cohesive, unique identity. Now, we know identity is a multifaceted concept. At the simplest level, though, it's referring to this sense of uniqueness and direction that is derived from all of their experiences so far. So college students are looking at their own personal beliefs, their goals, their values, and their desires and morality, and they're seeking to integrate them into a sense of, oh, this is who I am, and I can stand on this solid ground of my identity. Now, the sixth stage is then intimacy versus isolation, which is all about relationships and the creation of meaningful connections. Intimacy is achieved through closeness and commitment, whereas on the other end, isolation is the result of some reluctance and some apprehension towards intimacy. So Erikson saw these as two distinct stages. There's identity and then there's intimacy. And he said, we've got to know ourselves before we make a commitment to somebody else. But many theorists today believe that there is significant and important overlap between identity and intimacy. And Jeffrey Arnett is one of them. He's actually the psychologist who put this term emerging adulthood onto the map, because he proposed we don't just go from adolescence to adulthood, but rather there is an in-between time. And he thought that in-between time was the ages of 18 to 29 years old. Many folks would say, it's more like 18 to 25. But either way, 18 to 25 or 18 to 29, there is a unique developmental stage in which individuals further explore their personal and relational identities without the responsibilities of marriage, parenthood, or financial independence. As Arnett describes it, emerging adulthood can be defined as an age of identity exploration, an age of instability, an age of self-focus, an age of feeling in between, and an age of possibilities. He suggested that emerging adults confront two main questions during this period. What kind of person am I, and what kind of person would suit me best as a partner through life? So for most emerging adults, engaging in a variety of romantic relationships is part of answering their identity question. Although they often postpone formal commitments such as marriage, they do not abstain from emotional intimacy by any means, and you all know this all too well. So they are dating around, even if they're delaying the age of which they're getting married. So the bottom line when we look at these two theories is that relational development and intimacy occurs during a time of continuing and often intense identity development, not to mention significant brain changes as well. Let me tell you a little bit about what's happening in what I call the hijacked brain. Brain research over the past 25 years has revealed that there are more changes in our brains, specifically our prefrontal cortex, during adolescence and early adulthood than we once thought. The prefrontal cortex, often thought of as the chief executive officer, or our thinking brain, is where rational decision-making resides. It's responsible for things such as working memory, planning, and regulating our moods. It's during our teenage and early 20-something years that our prefrontal cortex is evolving into its adult shape. Similar to infancy, this period of neurological development is marked by neurons rearranging themselves. They either connect with a buddy, known as neuronal connection, or they die off, known as pruning. There's a caveat though. We all have a competing chief. It's the chief emotional officer, known as the amygdala. The amygdala is the storehouse of all feelings, affections, and passions. And as one of the most highly connected regions of the brain, it occupies a position at the very geometric center. Without our amygdala, life would have no personal meaning, no passion, no excitement, or fun. Because the prefrontal cortex is undergoing change and not fully developed in early adulthood, the amygdala arguably has an upper hand in this competition. Recent discoveries in neuroscience reveal this truth. We rely most heavily on our amygdala during adolescence and emerging adulthood. Furthermore, our prefrontal cortex, our thinking brain, is not fully developed until age 25. That means our emotional maturity, self-image, and judgment are not fine-tuned until we are 25 years old. So combine these brain changes and developmental tasks with technology, popular culture, and love in the 21st century, and we're potentially in a hot mess. Well, our college students are potentially in a hot mess. Because what do we see happening regarding love and relationships today? As a culture, we are obsessed with the idea of love. I mean, the wedding industry is $40 billion. Think of all the reality TV shows and movies that your students are watching about love. And we expect much more from intimate relationships today than we did 50 years ago. Our partner, after all, is going to be our lover, our best friend, our confidant, our co-parent, our business partner, maybe our financial advisor, potentially even our community. Some researchers have argued that the divorce rate is so high because we have actually overburdened marriage with unrealistic expectations. So in addition to our expectations of love and marriage, we've got love in the digital age, which we are really just beginning to grasp and research about how our intricate ways of being plugged in affect how we love. What we do know is that choice overload is incredibly real for your college student, which is having so many possibilities that a thoughtful choice becomes difficult. Just think of the number of times that young people swipe across dating apps and things of the sort today. So when we're overloaded with choice, what we actually find is that we don't make a choice at all. So we've got choice overload. We also know that so much of young adults' lives are lived online. And as a result, they are curating their identity as opposed to discovering it, right? So they're thinking about, how do I want to appear? How do I want to present myself? And they curate this identity as opposed to let it unfold and discover it. And third, we also know in regards to love in the digital age that although humans are more connected than ever before in history, we are lonelier than ever before. So we are living in a digital, hypersexual age where we are obsessed with the idea of love, but we often don't know how to go about finding or maintaining intimate, loving relationships. There are unprecedented levels of depression, anxiety, and loneliness. As a matter of fact, loneliness has been an epidemic in America today. 2 in 5 Americans report that they sometimes or always feel that their social relationships are not meaningful. And 1 in 5 say they are lonely, they lack companionship, or they're socially isolated. And unfortunately, Generation Z, which is 18 to 22-year-olds, and Millennials, which is 23 to 37-year-olds, rated themselves highest on feelings associated with loneliness. They're lonely, but they report having a lot of close friends. So how does this play out? How does this affect college students and young adults in their intimate relationships? It seems that one way this is playing out is hookup culture. Let me just quickly define what I mean when I say hookup culture, or you can go and ask your college son or daughter about how they might define that. But the term hooking up is an enormous umbrella, but it's defined by three aspects. The first is it includes some form of sexual intimacy, whether that's a kiss or actual intercourse. The second, it's brief. And the third, it's intended to be purely physical in nature. It requires both parties shutting off any sort of emotional communication or commitment. And as I say to my students, or your son and daughter, when we just show up in our bodies, we make ourselves emotionally invisible. And when we dodge vulnerability and visibility, we cheat ourselves out of intimacy. So what can we do? What can you do as their parent? And what are we at Westmont doing? How can all of us best support and equip your college student as they discover God's place for them in this world and as they cultivate intimate, healthy, loving connections and relationships? I want to end by talking about 6 or 7 things that we all can be doing to support these young adults. And the first is talk about it. Keep the lines of communication open. When you are communicating, you are in a relationship. And when you have a relationship, you have influence. As a parent myself and a professor and a therapist, I'll take friction and challenge and debate and argumentativeness any day over a silent standoff or a stalemate. Rest assured that I am talking about hookup culture and how we dodge visibility and vulnerability, and we're talking about casual sex and dating apps with your son or daughter. And especially if they take my classes, then we're really talking about it in Marriage 101. We're discussing, hey, what are your thoughts on why college students and young adults are so compliant when it comes to casual sex and hookup culture? They do anonymous Slido polls in my class so they can truly tell me what they're thinking and if they're engaging in these behaviors. We talk about FOMO. We talk about choice overload, how the digital age makes it all too easy to connect with someone and then disconnect. I challenge them to live and love in alignment with their values. I ask them to think about whether their actions line up with their stated intentions and desires and beliefs. I ask them, hey, are you able to quiet the outer noise? Tune in to your inner values and beliefs and emotions and use that awareness to guide the way that you engage in loving relationships. By the way, I hope that you are keeping the lines of communication open and talking about it with them as well. And rest assured that they push back and they sometimes become argumentative, maybe even rude to you. They're not rude with me, but they do sometimes push back. But they do that because they trust you. So keep the lines of communication open. Second, make communication safe. Over the past 2 decades of working with couples and families, I have found 2 overarching reasons that we do not communicate directly and honestly with one another. We are afraid of losing another's love, and we are fearful of retaliation. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. This fear is so great we would rather be loved and not known. Said another way, our desire to be welcomed, included, adored, and needed is so overwhelming that in the face of conflict, we choose the path of least resistance and avoid speaking the truth. I outline 4 steps to making communication safe in my book, Reimagining Your Love Story. But for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into them now, and I'm going to lure you to my website or to Amazon to find the book and purchase it yourself. But I do want to say this, to make communication safe, you need to refrain from judgment, anger, and correction. That should not be your first line of defense. Instead, you must perspective take and empathize with your college-age son or daughter, which, by the way, empathizing and perspective taking does not mean that you agree with them. So just keep that in mind. I love what Tim Keller said. Love without truth is sentimentality. It supports and affirms us, but it keeps us in denial about our flaws. Truth without love is harshness. It gives us information, but in such a way that we cannot really hear about it. So make communication safe. Third, listen to understand, not necessarily to respond. So that means listen actively to your son or daughter. Be curious. And by the way, refrain from why questions, because this automatically puts emerging adults, and actually any of us, on the defense, because it implies judgment when we ask a why question. So actively listen, be curious, and as you listen, refrain from correcting them or giving instruction, because that undermines the choices that they've made, and ultimately, it undermines their competence and confidence. Fourth, allow for silence, meaning give space and be respectful of their psychological ownership. Like every single one of us, emerging adults need time and space to process an experience. So whether they're dating somebody or they're having a crush or they're thinking they're going to marry someone, and you might not agree with their decision, give them time and space. I know that as a parent, I am incredibly eager to hear all about it, sometimes to jump in and problem solve, right? But we all as parents need to be mindful that insisting that our kids share with us actually impedes their process. Their feelings and their experiences belong to them, not to you, not to me. So don't hover or insist on your timing. Allow them to grow and be challenged. Give them space. Because when we are alone and disconnected from others, including technology, we actually can reflect on our own emotions and experiences. We learn more about ourselves and we understand our own capacity and our resources. So psychological ownership fosters independence and problem solving. So allow for that silence, give them space and be respectful of it. 5, recognize what you bring to the interaction, meaning be mindful of your own inner state. What are you worried about? What are you preoccupied by? Know that you as their parent, and I recognize that I as their professor, I still have some power over them. And the last thing I want to do, and that you want to do, is to use your power poorly. And unfortunately, if you're tired or stressed or when emotions are running high, we adults sometimes lose it, even though we have a fully developed brain since we're post-age 25, right? Sometimes though we lose it and we use the shame card. Recently, even as a clinician myself, I lost it with my soon-to-be teenager. I was exhausted, I was fighting a head cold, I was grading all of your sons and daughters' exams and essays. And my 12-year-old was very sassy. And I said to her in a very loud voice, and I tend to not raise my voice, "You are completely behaving like a spoiled brat." And then I walked away. So let me offer a brief word about shame before getting to my next point, because it dovetails all of this. Shame is a weapon that we all have. And like any weapon, it's a lose-lose game. Shame is destructive because it goes after their personhood, not their actions or behaviors. It cuts to the core as it's an attack on your son or daughter's character. And for youth and emerging adults, their choice is to either side with the shame, internalizing the fact that, well, I guess I'm a spoiled brat, I'm just entitled and I'm a jerk, or their other choice is to disregard you. Side with the shame or disregard you. That is a lose-lose game. So recognize what you bring to the interaction. Be mindful to not use shame, whatever the mood is that you are in. And number 6, repair and reconnect. So I knocked on my daughter's door a minute after my very loud, "You're acting like a completely spoiled brat." And she gave me permission to enter. And as soon as I opened my mouth to apologize, she burst into tears and said, "Mom, you called me a spoiled brat." She's not a full-blown teen yet, which is why I saw some of those tears and that vulnerability. Sometimes your college student might not give you that, right? But still, repair and reconnect. And as much as I wanted to connect her and say, "No, I didn't call you a spoiled brat. I said you were acting like a spoiled brat," I refrained. I reached out to hug her, and I simply said, "I'm sorry. I did not mean to hurt you." I let a minute or two go in silence before clarifying the fact that I did tell her, "You were behaving like a spoiled brat. I didn't actually say you were a spoiled brat." And I talked about her tone of voice and the sass and the resistance that she had for me asking her to do a simple task. The point is, conflict happens when we are in loving family relationships. It's inevitable in every close relationship. What matters most is how do you handle it with your young adult? What do you do with the conflict? In my clinical work over the past 2 decades, I have discovered that some individuals, couples, and families choose harmony over intimacy. And don't get me wrong, harmony sounds oh so wonderful. But note the distinction between harmony and intimacy when it comes to conflict in our relationships. In harmonious relationships, people get along and they rarely fight. When conflict is brewing, they either avoid it or sweep it under the rug and ignore it, and then they move on. They keep the peace at all costs because harmony is a safe choice. In intimate relationships, grievances and disagreements are aired. They're not avoided as we seek to understand, empathize, and have compassion. When conflict is afoot, those who choose intimacy face it. Some even welcome it, knowing they feel closer to the other after it's worked through. The main difference between harmony and intimacy, then, is how we handle conflict. Conflict without resolution leads to a harmonious relationship. Conflict with resolution results in intimacy. And I, for one, would rather choose intimacy. Name the elephant in the room and deal with it. Work through it, apologize, repair, and reconnect because it shows that you care and that you notice. Not to mention that when you engage in the conflict with your son or daughter, and when you own your part and apologize, it creates that culture of communication that we all want. And lastly, what can we as parents, as professors do to support our college students on this journey of developing healthy, intimate relationships? Is that you can be an imitator of Christ himself. Social learning theory is alive and well. And social learning theory is just an age-old theory that says monkey see, monkey do, is the way I think of it, is that youth and even college students imitate those people that they love, that they look up to, that they admire, and that they think are competent. And you, as their parent, are one of those people. Is it any surprise then that Scripture admonishes each one of us to be intentional about who we imitate? We are to be imitators of God, walking in the way of love, modeling and focusing on Christ's sacrificial love as we love one another. We are to center our minds and our hearts on what is true, what is noble, what is right, what is pure, lovely, admirable, and praiseworthy. Amen and amen. Thank you for entrusting your college student to us here at Westmont.